Welcome back to my channel. You already know it's your boy Hood Digital, the Rock Reactor, back with another video. Yes, sir. Before I proceed, let me know where you tapping in from. Let me know what country, what city, what mountain, what hill, what cave, what island, what planet, what universe. Let me know where you at. Represent your hood. Yes, sir. A world of love to my Ukraine, an abundance of peace, hopefully coming soon as we pray every day for my Ukraine. As I stand with God, I will always stand with Ukraine. That's right. Now, I wanted to do this video. I came across this video, I think like 2 days ago, and I wanted to review it because I want to talk about it. I want to know what my peoples from Ukraine think. And even sometimes, guys, I see that there's some comments from Russian citizens throwing shade at me and against what I am saying. And I just want to let you guys know that, and those of you that are Kremlin sympathizers, that I will always stand with Ukraine. It's just that simple. I stand with God. This is all I got to say to you guys, the Kremlin sympathizers. As I stand with God, I stand with Ukraine. That's all I got to say to you guys. But as I was saying, and I also stand with the innocent Russian citizens who unfortunately are also caught in the crossfire. And I pray that Putin comes to his senses, Putin and his Kremlin boys come to his senses and just stop the war and avoid casualties on his own citizens. Because at the end of the day, there's children, there's old people, there's innocent citizens there also, who also deserve the pursuit of happiness and also deserve peace. That's all I gotta say. Now, let's get right to this, guys. This is called Russia's defeat in Ukraine is inevitable, and here's why. So let's find out why, guys. Let me know what you think. Let me know. Let's talk about it. And before we do, guys, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell, hit the like button. Any donations to my channel will be greatly appreciated. My PayPal account is on the description. Let's get right to it.
Russia was doomed to lose the Ukraine war from the very start. Vladimir Putin may not have seen it. Perhaps he still doesn't.
I had to stop it right there, guys. I had to stop it because I've got to say this. I did not think so. When the war first started, guys, I'm going to keep it real. I thought it was just going to be a done deal. I thought that war wasn't going to last 6 months. I thought Russia was going to annihilate Ukraine, because when you look at the map, Ukraine is a small country compared to Russia. So it's like a big bully. It's like us, that's a little island. Look it up, Dominican Republic is a little island going against the United States. No fucking chance in hell. That's what I thought. And so I guess I didn't study it, and everybody thought the same thing. Everybody thought the same thing, because we all have this perception of Russia as being one of the most powerful countries in the world. They're like the only ones that would match the U.S. We had that perception. Unfortunately, that's not the case.
And one could argue that the West never saw it coming either. However, Ukraine always had an underlying advantage, which is only now fully coming to the fore, that it has held against Russia for well over 3 years in a war that was meant to be over in days. This is why Putin won't win in Ukraine. And it all comes down to something that Ukraine is doing that Russia...
See, he said it. It was a war that was meant to be over in days.
That it has held against Russia for well over 3 years in a war that was meant to be over in days. This is why Putin won't win in Ukraine. And it all comes down to something that Ukraine is doing that Russia has failed to do: achieve technological superiority. That's according to Paul Warburg, who laid out his argument in a YouTube video on October 1st, noting that Ukraine's technological advantage isn't just a product of its association with the West. It comes down to key differences in everything about Ukraine and Russia, from the way the two countries govern their societies to the strategies they employ on the battlefield.
Really what we are seeing at this point in the war in Ukraine is Russia is getting inherently weaker with each passing day, while Ukraine is getting increasingly stronger with each passing day, especially from a technological standpoint.
This is something that's been happening throughout the entire war, Warburg adds. But now, the pace of Ukraine's technological advances has reached such a point that Russia has no hope of keeping up. One only needs to look at some of the most recent examples of weapons Ukraine has come up with to see that. Take the Flamingo for instance. At a cursory glance, this weapon may not seem all that different from the cruise missiles that Russia has been using against Ukraine since Putin launched his invasion. However, it is different in several ways. For a start, it's a drone cruise missile hybrid, with modern diplomacy adding that it also has elements of a penetrator bomb built into it. Nothing like that's been really built before, as Ukraine has developed a new subcategory of a weapon that leans into everything it's learned about drone warfare during the war with Russia. In essence, the Flamingo is the result of years of tweaking and testing, of Ukraine allowing its most innovative people to cook so they can come up with things that might not even be dreamed of in Russian society. A weapon that acts like a drone and a missile at once and can reach 3,000 kilometers, which is about 1,860 miles deep into Russia, while carrying a warhead that weighs over a ton. The video will return to why Russia could never create something like this later. But first, take a look at some other Ukrainian innovations. The Flamingo is an example of Ukraine coming up with a new weapon to serve a purpose. The country's been conducting long-range drone strikes on Russian territory for a long time. It also had long-range missiles provided by the West, though it often faces restrictions on how and when it can use them. The US has only in September started to allow Ukraine to attack Russian targets with American-made missiles, after having quietly blocked the country from doing so for months. The Flamingo is a solution to that sort of problem. If Ukraine builds it at home, nobody can stop Ukraine from using it. This is an example of Ukraine adapting to what's in front of it, and the same.
Something else that we thought, or that I thought, is that the reason why Ukraine has had no chance, one of the reasons was because Russia has 1,000 times more resources than Ukraine, as I understood. Even with outside help, because at the end of the day, all they could provide you is weapons and weapons and weapons and maybe some resources, but they cannot provide you with manpower, as I understood. So at the end of the day, Russia still had more resources, but it just goes to show you that you can have all the resources, but if you don't have brain and preparation, and I think something else is that Russia probably underestimated Ukraine. I think Russia slept on Ukraine.
Same approach is seen with its development of interceptor drones. These drones, which can cost as little as $1,000 per unit, are designed for the sole purpose of stopping Russia's long-range drone hordes in their tracks. And Ukraine is using them. This technology is battle-tested already, to the point where Ukraine's partners are willing to invest in it. In September, the UK committed to a plan that will allow Ukraine to build these interceptor drones in massive numbers. Dubbed Project Octopus, the plan should allow Ukraine to produce thousands of interceptors every month, giving it a massive stockpile of drones that have already proven themselves effective against the Shahed types that Russia launches at Ukraine. The Kyiv Independent adds that Ukraine eventually wants to get to a point where it can deploy 1,000 of its interceptors every day to stop Russia's drones in their tracks. Again, Ukraine saw a problem. Then it solved it. Ukraine has also spearheaded the development of drones that use artificial intelligence or AI to great effect. This time, Ukraine is looking to solve the manpower disparity between itself and Russia. One of the most recent examples of Ukraine leaning into AI comes from the guided AI attack drone swarms the country has introduced onto the battlefield. On September 2nd, United 24 Media said that Ukraine has become the first military in history to conduct battlefield operations using swarms of drones controlled by AI. Those drones don't need human operators. They don't need Ukraine soldiers to put themselves at risk. Rather, they can almost serve as replacements for soldiers, being capable of hunting down and destroying Russian infantry and armor with very limited human oversight. Russia's plan all along has been to overwhelm Ukraine with its manpower advantage. With AI drones, Ukraine turns the tables and once again innovates with a focus on solving a problem. These three examples of Ukraine's innovation are impressive, even if they're not breakthroughs in the way that the first intercontinental ballistic missile, for instance, might have been. However, it's not just the technology itself that delivers superiority to Ukraine, it's how that technology is used, as Warburg explained. Weapons like the Flamingo.
You know, that's exactly right. Something else I said, like somebody in the comments said that Ukraine is winning the war because of the U.S.'s taxpayers. That may have some truth in it, but at the end of the day, they could give them all the weapons they want. If they don't know how to use it and they're not prepared, especially with the manpower that Russia has versus the manpower Ukraine has, there would be no match. I think that Ukraine is doing their homework. I think that Russia is waking up at 8 a.m. and Ukraine is waking up at 5 a.m. That's what's happening here.
And Ukraine's interceptor drones might not seem very innovative from a technological standpoint, Warburg notes,
but are very innovative from a warfare standpoint in how they are being used to address the actual situation on the battlefield.
Contrast this with what Warburg notes that Russia is doing on the innovation front.
At the same time, Russia seems to not really be innovating all that much. They are, in some cases, matching the innovations that Ukraine is bringing, especially where it's easy to match those innovations. But for the most part, Russia is not really bringing a whole lot of new stuff to bear on the battlefield.
And he has a point. Perhaps the most important of Russia's innovations so far has been its glide bombs, which allow Russia to convert Soviet-era dumb bombs into semi-guided munitions. But beyond that, Russia hasn't innovated a whole lot. It's just copied Ukraine's homework, assuming that the homework was easy to copy. This shows a fundamental difference in how Ukraine and Russia go about waging this war. For Russia, reliance on what it already has seems to be more important than innovating. As for Ukraine, adaptation is key. Every time a new problem arises, Ukraine's technological superiority allows it to confront that problem and come up with a solution for it. However, it goes deeper than a difference in military approaches. The real reason that Russia was doomed to lose the Ukraine war from day one is that its very society is structured in such a way to make it impossible for Russia to ever hold the technological edge over Ukraine. What it really boils down to, Warburg says, is the battle between democracy and dictatorship, as history has shown several times already.
That's exactly right, guys. You know what I think is one of Ukraine's biggest advantage over Russia? It's that Russia is breaking itself. It's breaking within itself. There's a lot of divisions based on what I see within Russia. So Russia is crippled inside. It looks good. It looks big. It looks strong. But Russia being such a big of a country, the idealism changes, and everybody has different views on the war. And I think there's a lot of internal enemies that the Kremlin has. So therefore, the support is limited. The internal support is limited within the Russian citizens. And Ukraine is probably using that to their advantage. You know, the fact that makes them very weak. Something else I think is that I don't think the Kremlin has enough support for the soldiers. I don't think that the soldiers are supported. I don't think that the soldiers are regarded when they're in battlefield. I don't think they're treated well. I think they're just put into the forefront to die, and there's no regard to their family. There's no regard for anything. They don't have enough support. I think they just throw them in the battlefield. Here, go, get the weapon. Here's a weapon. Go and do this. Go and do that. There's not that much support that the soldiers in the battlefields are getting. And I think I've seen some videos where they speak of what I'm saying. They confirm what I am saying. That's another thing. And I think the main thing is that Russia has definitely underestimated Ukraine.
Ready? The former overcomes the latter on the technological front for a simple reason. Warburg points out,
or governments that are more inclusive of average people in society, even if they are not full democracies, are inherently superior to governments that are less inclusive, that are more centralized, and where there are less opportunities for average people.
His point is that a free society fosters innovation because the people within that society are rewarded for innovating. Contrast that to a centralized society where innovation can only happen if it's prompted by an order from up high, and it becomes clear why Ukraine is pulling ahead. Its innovators build to solve problems, and they're rewarded for doing so. But in Russia, anybody who might have an innovative bone in their body is given every reason not to come up with new ideas. Back to the interceptor drone example. Ukraine created this drone because it has a problem with Russia's long-range drone attacks. These attacks have become more frequent and more intense throughout 2025, leading to many occasions where Russia has bombarded Ukraine with hundreds of Shahed-type drones in an effort to overwhelm air defenses. September was a standout month for this tactic on the Russian side. ABC News says that Russia launched 5,636 drones at Ukraine in September. That represented a 39% increase on the number of Russian drones launched the previous month, though it was still a little short of the record-breaking 6,443 drones Russia launched in July 2025. Still, the problem is clear. Russia is launching thousands of drones per month, and Ukraine needs to deal with them. Now, interceptor drones don't offer a massively high-tech way of dealing with this problem. They're cheap and easy for Ukraine to make. That affordability is what makes them such a standout technology. A small drone costing $1,000 or so can be loaded with an inexpensive warhead to be flown into a Shahed-type drone that may have cost Russia anywhere between 20 and 70 times that amount to build. Interestingly, Ukraine is solving a secondary problem with these drones. Directly, interceptors help Ukraine to tackle Russia's Shahed-type drone hordes. Indirectly, the cost difference between interceptors and Shaheds is so vast that they also allow Ukraine to drain Russia's financial resources by forcing it to launch more failed strikes. As Warburg points out,
and this is basically allowing Ukraine to defeat Russia in a war of attrition, where it is going to be too expensive for Russia to defeat Ukraine over the long term because it is more affordable for Ukraine to defend itself.
There is plenty to build on with this point, though much of it doesn't relate to Ukraine's technological superiority. To learn more about the impact that attrition is having on Russia, check out our video where we cover the topic, along with how even Kremlin propaganda is starting to turn against Putin. The key point here is that it's Ukraine's adaptability that it's allowing it to turn the war of attrition that Russia started on its head. Warburg makes that point, as already discussed. Mick Ryan, writing for Futura Doctrina, reinforces it in an article where he claims that Ukraine has changed the entire character of war through its malleability. The tentacles of technological insertions reach even further than drones. They've enabled the meshing of artificial intelligence, civil and military sensor networks, and the democratization of battlefield information. Ryan writes, AI systems can help drones pick and confirm targets by combing through open source sensors and intelligence analyses, and then combining this information with military intelligence. Again, this shows a link to democracy versus dictatorship in information sharing, as well as the military approach. Ukraine actively encourages anybody and everybody to share information via whatever channels they have available to them to help the war effort. Russia.
See, that's what I'm saying. There's more regards. There's more unity. Unity trumps all. There's more unity. And I think it's just the fact that in Russia, and like I said, this has to do also with being such a big country. There's such a big country where everything changes so fast. Not everybody has the same sentiment. And I think that the military in Russia is not regarded much as just go out there, do whatever and do whatever. They don't really have an actual tactic. It's sort of like when Hitler used to just send his soldiers out there to do whatever, and you see them cold and starving, and it's something like that.
On the other hand, represses. It does things like shutting down internet access in regions subjected to Ukraine's long-range drone strikes because it wants as little information as possible coming out. How is the average Russian even supposed to conceive of a solution to the challenges Russia faces against Ukraine when they're not even allowed to see what those challenges are? Information then is as critical to Ukraine as creating an environment in which its innovators can do what they do best. And it's perhaps the lack of information being shared with people who might be able to help that's causing Russia so many problems on the technological front. Russia lags behind Ukraine at every technological turn. Warburg thinks back to the very beginning of the war, when Ukraine first started using drones to tackle Russia's armor.
When Ukraine first introduced drones to the battlefield, Russia's response was to mock them, make fun of them, and to continue sending large waves of tanks, infantry, and armored vehicles.
It's now clear how that turned out for Russia. Over 1 million casualties, more than 11,200 destroyed tanks, and almost 23,300 lost armored vehicles later, and Russia now knows that it can't bring massive armored assaults to a drone fight. Russia copied, of course. Once it saw that Ukraine was successful with the strategy it previously mocked, Russia started doing what Ukraine was doing. But by that point, Russia was already behind, and the gap in technology has only been getting wider ever since. That fact is what many tend to miss, Warburg notes. It's relatively easy to see how Ukraine innovates and Russia copies. But what's often missed is that the technological wedges between Ukraine and Russia grow with every one of these innovation into copying cycles, Warburg claims.
And we're now reaching a point where Ukraine's advantages over Russia could become catastrophic.
Ukraine's interceptor drones are one such wedge. They already have these drones, and they're combat proven, and as mentioned earlier, being moved into mass production with the help of Ukraine's allies. As always, Russia has tried to copy. However, it's so far behind that whatever interceptors it's making are still in the testing stages. As Forbes said on September 9, the only Russian interceptor drones that have been seen are models paraded around or displayed at exhibitions. None of these drones have been deployed yet, and it may be several months before they are. This massive wedge provides Ukraine with opportunities, especially with long-range drone strikes. Ukraine's strategy for the last few months has been to target Russia's oil refineries with repeated attacks, rather than isolated strikes. The strategy is working. Around 40% of Russia's refining capacity has been taken offline by drones that Russia might have been able to stop with interceptors. But Russia isn't there yet, and that means Ukraine likely has a few more months in which it can devastate Russian infrastructure, perhaps to the point of no return, while Russia tries to come up with its own version of something that Ukraine is already using. Russia has been here before. Warburg brings up the Cold War between the US and Russia, and how it was America's ability to innovate that ultimately led to its winning. A perfect example comes from the author of Chip War, Chris Miller, reports Taiwanese outlet Commonwealth magazine. The outlet draws on Miller's work to highlight the example of Texas Instruments coming up with integrated circuit technology that made pocket calculators possible. Naturally, the US military saw the potential for other uses, and it engaged Texas Instruments to create integrated circuit technology to help it develop the Minuteman II intercontinental ballistic missile that gave the US the ability to hit Russia with a nuke launch from American territory. Russia eventually came up with its own missiles, later, as always. But what's seen with this Cold War example, as is also the case in the Ukraine war, is Warburg's point about democracies overcoming dictatorships in action. Texas Instruments didn't create integrated circuit technology because somebody told them to. They just did it because a new technology brings with it the chance for great rewards. While many of Ukraine's innovations are focused on war right now, the same philosophy is in place. Ukraine's innovators aren't told what to build. They're simply allowed to build, and they're rewarded when they come up with something that can benefit Ukraine in its current situation. If Ukraine weren't at war, these same innovators would be coming up with other sorts of products, and they'd be getting their rewards because they live in a society that allows them to register intellectual property and experience the fruits of their labor. Russia doesn't offer these opportunities to its people. The Soviets had to steal US technology to try to keep up with the US during the Cold War. They managed to steal it, but it almost always failed to make copies of American innovations that lived up to the originals, Warburg notes. The exact same thing is happening in the Ukraine war right now. The new weapons Russia builds are just a poor man's version of what Ukraine has innovated. Even the drones with which Russia assaults Ukraine aren't a Russian innovation. They're copies of Iran's Shahed drones. And what few tweaks Russia makes to the original Iranian design.
Guys, what I want to know is the following. If Russia was so weak from the beginning, why has Russia always had the reputation of being such a strong military force? that's how I've always known Russia to be. I mean, Russia's even second to United States, and Russia and China. It was United States, Russia, China. You know, they're like the strongest countries in the world. Russia being one of them. So if this was the case, like the way they're talking about Russia now, like Russia's not prepared at all. So Russia basically military wise was just all smoke and mirrors. I mean, they making Russia out to be weak. And I'm going to tell you something, that after this war, no matter what, Russia, I think, is already going to look like one of the weakest countries. At the end, Russia's going to lose a lot of reputation. And I think Russia's going to, after this war, when this war is over, hopefully soon, I think Russia's going to crumble from inside. And there's going to be a lot of separations within Russia.
Can't even come close to comparing to Ukraine's drone cruise missile hybrid Flamingo weapon. Russia is limited in how it innovates, and it has been for decades. The reason comes back to Russia's centralized form of government, as highlighted earlier. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, dug deeper into Russia's issues in a September 2021 piece, in which it highlighted 3 structural constraints of Russian society that hamper innovation. Russia's preference for domestic supply chains means it can't draw from as many markets as innovation leaders. There's also been a decline in educational standards, particularly when it comes to the sciences, CSIS claims. And of course, sanctions, even back in 2021, limited Russia's access to international technologies that it might be able to use to innovate. Warburg highlights another issue: oligarchs, or, as Warburg dubs them, the inconceivably wealthy people in Russia who act like a mafia within the country. Nothing gets done in Russia without the oligarchs taking their slice, almost as though they're running a mafia-esque extortion racket that exists to take away the fruits of labor that Ukraine's and America's great minds enjoyed as a result of their inventions. As Warburg says,
for your average Russian person, it's not that there's zero innovation in Russia, but for your average Russian person, there is not as much incentive to innovate because a lot of people fear that if they're successful, that could be the worst possible thing for them.
That's a symptom of living in both a dictatorship and an oligarchy, where the rich and powerful will always come calling for a far bigger slice of whatever somebody comes up with than will end up being given to the actual innovator. Imagine living in a city run by the mafia, Warburg asks. Would someone rather have a basic job that keeps them out of the mafia's spotlight? Or would they prefer to run a business that becomes successful enough to cause the mafia to come calling, offering protection in exchange for a cut? That's what Russia's potential innovators face. And
eventually losing their lives, because they probably lose their life just for the oligarchy to take whatever idea they had of making their own.
They be blamed for choosing the nondescript job, even when they have what it takes to come up with interesting new technologies. Ukraine's societal advantage, and what is going to win it the war that Russia never actually had a chance of winning, is that it goes in the opposite direction. Ukraine's win-win 2030 strategy for global impact is the perfect example. Under this scheme, Ukraine offers its innovators everything they need to come up with new ideas. The country's entrepreneurs get access to global markets, along with research and development infrastructure. Ukraine aids them in protecting and commercializing their intellectual property, meaning those taking part in the program actually receive the money they deserve for coming up with great ideas in the first place. Yes, this is a state-created program, but the products that come out of this program won't be owned by the state, and that's the difference. An equivalent Russian program would inevitably require the intellectual property of anything useful that came out of it to be handed over to the Russian state, likely with minimal recompense for the person who invented the product. Putin won't win in Ukraine because Russia's very society makes it impossible for the country to achieve technological superiority. Against other nations, that may not have been a problem, but in Ukraine, Russia is dealing with an opponent that adapts to what it sees and gives it great minds the space, time and incentives they need to create what needs to be created to deal with the enemy. Remember, Ukraine doesn't need to obliterate Russia to win. It just has to use its technological advantage to attrit Russia to the point where it can no longer fight. Now, if you need any evidence that this attritional strategy born from innovation is working, you only have to look at Russia's gasoline situation right now. Putin is so desperate that he's crawling to Belarus for help after Ukraine took everything from Russia. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more videos covering how Ukraine could be able to gain an edge over Russia.
In other words, Russia is a society that being successful for a citizen to be successful is actually a disadvantage. It's better to just have a normal job and being a laborer and just minding your business. Because being successful, everybody wants a piece of the pie. So like I said, Russia after this versus the great Ukraine, which has a great democracy and incentives for their citizens who come up with ideas and actually get money and success for coming up with ideas and technology on how to fight the enemy. That's democracy right there. That's democracy. Guys, unity will always prevail. Unity will always prevail. And regard for your citizens, regard for your people. Some way, somehow, somebody putting up there. The citizens put Kremlin up there some way, somehow. So I kind of see where this is going. I kind of see why it's like a David and Goliath, and David is winning. And based on what I see here, they have no chance. And I think that after this war, like I said before, Russia's going to divide itself. And there probably won't be no Russia, or Russia is going to become smaller, and other little countries are going to start forming and getting independent. Other sections and regions of Russia is probably going to get independent, go independent. Guys, all I got to say is this: unity will always trump non-unity, will always trump division. And I will lastly end this with saying, may God bless, may God continue to bless Ukraine. Guys, subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell, hit the like button. Any donations to my channel will be greatly appreciated. My PayPal account is on the description. Love you, Ukraine. Peace, love, and God bless.